Welcome to this week's Dogcast. This is the NADOG Days of Summer. We need to think of a much longer title for this web series, but this is a bi-weekly web series where we are inviting speakers from the NADOG local events and then other interesting people and speakers that Brian and I know as well. I am Jim Schild. I'm the founder of North American DevOps Group and one of the hosts of the event here today. And then with me is my co-host, Brian. Brian, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Brian Dawson, a longtime friend, colleague of Jim's, and someone that has practiced and evangelized DevOps. I want to say, is it almost a couple of decades now? No, I guess about 15 years. And with us today, we have Will Fromme, excuse me. Will Fromme is a solutions engineer from Percona. And today we're going to talk to him about platform engineering and really how do we empower platform engineers and the platform engineering practice. Welcome, Will.
Yeah, really nice to actually be on here. This is great. So I guess maybe a little about me to keep it short, if you don't mind.
Tell us a bit about, if you could, tell me a bit about your role today, and then I would love to understand, based on the fact that I know part of the answer, how you ended up drawn to the space that you're working in today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess primarily my focus here in the solution engineering role is really to help those looking to fully leverage open source solutions, primarily on the database side. So avoiding, particularly, proprietary, old school DB2s, Oracles, MS SQL, and matching feature parity with open source databases, for various reasons. So that's primarily what Percona does. And, my role is primarily help mapping those out with our customers and POCing and making sure all of that stuff runs and works great, and just facilitating kind of that whole interaction with Percona being involved with kind of our end customers or users. But really what drew me to kind of this space specifically is my background and my study primarily in academia was, IT, but also business. So I think any kind of solution engineering role kind of rides the line of business talk and technical talk. So that's kind of how I came into this one. It was I think a perfect fit for me. So maybe I can switch on the dime and talk businessy, maybe talk, more IT things. But yeah, that's primarily it.
Maybe I'll test you. So having gone from being an engineering manager to being a technical pre-sales engineer, I had to learn the value of being bilingual in the sense of being able to talk technically and otherwise, which I think is an important skill for a solutions engineer. Before we move on to one of my canned questions here, I am just curious to ask, one calling out that databases and database engineers are kind of the unsung hero of software development and delivery, especially if people have moved to CI/CD. Quick question for you is, who do you find at Percona that you are primarily helping? Is it the app dev teams? Are you working with the database teams? Or is it, as I think we'll learn later, generally this thing that we'll define or discuss called platform engineers?
That's actually probably the best question you can answer. And there's probably some folks at Percona who probably aren't even 100% aware. But you'd think the answer is primarily, we're helping DBAs and SREs. And there is that to an extent. But honestly, a lot of the groups we really work with and empower are infrastructure teams, centers of excellence at organizations. So primarily it's those kind of roles, more DevOps or platform kind of engineering role, believe it or not. And that was something I didn't expect either coming into Percona.
All right, great. Okay, so I know I can easily take up the whole show from Jim, and I'm going to have to get to him in a minute. So I want to ask, do you have a favorite resource, a book, a blog, a website, a podcast that helps make you smarter, that you can recommend to our audience, or you would recommend to our audience?
Yeah. There's one I really like. I think anytime you're discussing anything, a lot of Percona is, kind of comparing open source to proprietary. There's one I really like that's specific to database itself. It's dbengines.com. And I like that because, how it aggregates its things is you can apply statistics to things you're talking about, big ones, will Postgres overtake MySQL as the most popular, or is open source utilization greater than proprietary? I've always liked that and following the graphs, and it's just good to know what's popular. I'm tracking Redis right now with the recent licensing change. They've adopted some new ones, one of them being SSPL, if you're familiar. It's a bit more aggressive, but yeah, I've always kind of liked that resource. So I'm watching the trend on Redis right now.
Awesome. And I'll say for the audience here who wants to go check it out, I've just opened it up for the first time. Really interesting overview and ranking of DB engines. But I went to dbengines.com. Note for the audience, it is db-engines.com.
Yes.
If you want to go ahead and check that out. Well, thanks. I'm excited to sort of hand you over to Jim and dig into the meat of empowering platform engineering.
Cool. And I want to start by saying, Willie, I've had the pleasure of meeting you a few times at the NADOG events, and want to thank you and thank Percona for supporting and sponsoring the local communities as well. You guys have been awesome this year, and looking forward to seeing you at the upcoming events in H2 as well. The first question I want to ask you, because this is common across almost all things that we do, especially in the DevOps space. Like even defining what DevOps is, like in our NADOG events, we do that quite often as just a theme for the event. Let's all talk about what all these things are. What is DevOps? What is CI/CD? And then you start getting the titles, and then the lines blur even more, because I think there are a lot of DevOps engineers or SREs. If you ask them what they do, what they describe is really platform engineering. In fact, I asked ChatGPT this morning, and she seemed kind of confused as well. And I asked her, what are some other names for platform engineer, DevOps engineer, SRE, cloud engineer, all those things came up. So if we can start there, can you talk about what is a platform engineer, and what are the challenges that are associated with that role?
Yeah, I think probably the interest, or the most simplest way to really define platform engineering, and also kind of gives an idea on how it differentiates from more typical kind of DevOps role, is what's delivered to the actual end user at the day. And, platform engineering is primarily focused with just enabling self-service capabilities for the actual, software engineers at the end of the day, or those actually it's to make their lives easier. And there's a particular number of reasons, why you would do that. But, when it comes to challenges, as I kind of said earlier, we speak to a lot of those kind of teams, infra teams, those who are more platform engineering focused and, have an internal something as a service. Obviously, typical background, Percona is very focused on the databases, as you can't tell. So it's typically internal database as a service. So we either try to leverage some of our free software or what we can do to help. But really, kind of when it comes to challenges, I think I noticed a couple things before I kind of expound on the second one, which is probably a more typical one. I think the first one is really, it's always interesting talking to organizations that are at different levels of maturity when they're either building this out or they've been doing this for years and they're fairly confident or competent. But I think the most interesting one is really the biggest challenge is where to start building this out. Especially I think is a big thing in tech space as companies, come out of startup mode, really trying to figure out kind of the ROI of, let's do our own, as a service, and everything, the resources, the physical or the actual personnel that go into making this, the continuous improvement, the maintain, whose responsibility is what. I think just really the biggest challenge is, like anything in life, I guess, is getting started in associating kind of the cost to these things. Is it worth doing this versus just leveraging, typically more costly as a service models, provided by another vendor or the cloud? I typically think that's the hardest hurdle to get over. But obviously, once you do have something established or maintaining it, I think probably the largest challenge for just platform engineering in general is, now you have this big thing to maintain, and you have a lot of end customers. I think a lot of the kind of challenges goes really that I tend to see personally is kind of end of life, versions. I recently listened to a talk at an event about just third-party, you know, integrations in your software. Now that's typically, just certain libraries, but, blow this up to an entire platform and you're viewing a lot of different dependencies. Say, you're using Kubernetes versions, Docker versions, all kinds of things to maintain. And, if your end thing that you're offering to your customers is, say a database, you may have what you kind of the canned deployments you support. You may have, the actual versions you support, and the app teams have all of these dependencies on this side. We can't upgrade PHP. We're worried about this new functionality in this new database version that might break something. So I think the still biggest challenge is still kind of the silo is probably the wrong word, but really, getting with those actual end users, those devs, and getting them aligned. Like, yes, we've created this fantastic platform for you, and you love throwing data at this thing we created for you or offered to you. But there's still kind of some maintenance. We can't just hit the upgrade button for your team. You have to be involved. Right? So we don't break anything when we upgrade a major version on the database. Correct. So I tend to see kind of the biggest challenges really are one, just getting started, and what it takes to associate the costs to feel confident that this is the direction your organization should go. Now that we're in a mode, we have the budget to do this, and we have a reason to not use cloud services, and also just really kind of the two-way street of working with your end users and the actual platform engineers as well, to make sure that they're aligned and aren't just throwing things at this, right? I tend to see those as kind of the probably the biggest challenges really associated with it.
I to jump in a bit and maybe give a self plug, a background. So I come from risk of dating myself from a time in the industry when we were on this cycle that over kind of decades happens of centralization. That is, when corporate, this is before the DevOps movement, but there's always been the cycle of we centralize engineering resources, we have corporate tools teams, the Office of Development, the Center of Excellence. And then I kind of watched us go to decentralization and come back, in particular around dev tools. And I think where I was going is I had the privilege at Sony PlayStation of founding and running for a number of years their tools and technology team, which is very much like these central tools organizations. Now, I'm going to say that platform engineering was a term that, and platform ops were terms that kind of came out of the blue for me, and were sort of new. And I'll pull back maybe later in the conversation to the reason I harked back to the old structure of tools and technology. But for now, what I want to get to is, what is the difference between, or do you have an opinion on what is the difference between a DevOps engineer or DevOps and platform engineering? Are DevOps and platform engineering one and the same?
Yeah, I don't think they're necessarily one and the same, but if you were to do a Venn diagram, there's a bit of crossover, right? I think at the end of the day, what really differentiate, I can't speak today, I guess, but how those differ is primarily on the platform. Well, how it really comes down to on the platform engineering side is really more, maintaining that platform and the underlying infrastructure, so to speak. Like, as simple as it comes down to, that's what I would say is the big thing. Kind of those type of roles, and sure, a DevOps person can step into a platform engineering role and do just fine. But for my thoughts, I think it's really kind of that simple. I think it's nice to kind of keep it simple, because explaining kind of the roles and responsibilities get confusing, especially for those who are on the outside and haven't necessarily worked in those. So I think that's the simplest kind of form to say it, is just platform engineering is a bit more focused on the actual platform and infrastructure.
Okay, great answer. Thanks.
I think we might actually see the DevOps engineering role or title go away, and have these more specialized titles, right? Like SREs and platform engineers and other things, because DevOps engineer, I think, is more of a catch-all. It doesn't really describe what anyone does. But
I think so.
Blasphemous that DevOps wasn't about you go hire an engineer and say we're doing DevOps, right?
Right. But that was what clicked in people's brains, is what they could understand was the easier thing to understand, right? Than trying to understand the whole concept of DevOps. But I do want to ask you about internal database as a service. You mentioned that in your response, and I want to know why I would want an internal database as a service as opposed to a public one, or as opposed to just a regular database.
Yeah, and before that, kind of just what you explained too, to go back also it explains kind of the answer you got from ChatGPT too. But yeah, to kind of explain, why an internal database is a service. Well, it typically comes down to a few things. One, the private database as a service offerings are great and offer you really great features. And I kind of made a joke earlier about, platform engineers, dealing with devs just throwing data at this brilliant database platform that they've created for them. And obviously, there's much more than just throwing data and maintaining schemas. But really, to get down to it, why an internal database as a service? Well, I think kind of organizations, there's a lot of things to consider. I'm sure if you'd ask most people this question, they'd tell you one, thing. It's usually cost driven, right? Depending on the size of your organization, you may not spend a lot or have the best relationship with a database as a service provider or major cloud vendor, so you're not getting kind of a lot of those discounts, right? I kind of said the difficulty to really kind of run those ROIs on doing this yourself, but the most time that answer really is correct. It's a lot of the time a cost-driven decision, but that's really not it. There's a lot of other things. Any kind of as a service thing gives you really strong guardrails. An example, things you can and cannot do with the database that you could do it yourselves if you were running it on VM or bare metal. I think a somewhat recent example is I like what RDS or Aurora offers you, but obviously there are things you can and cannot do in Postgres. And Postgres, I really like as a technology because it's very extendable. It really is true to open source from its kind of community curated background. It's fantastic, but specific in the context of RDS and Aurora, I think kind of last year, maybe year and a half, they really introduced the PG logical extension. But why that's interesting is I believe that was really introduced to natively with Postgres and like Postgres 11, and that's been out for a while. So to finally get that integrating with RDS, probably the most popular public database as a service, I think it kind of paints a picture of sometimes those guardrails are things you can't do with a public DBAS. You don't have a lot of direction on kind of its roadmap, what's important to them if you're not, say, their largest customer, their largest user. Obviously, what's nice for an internal platform as a service for data or a private database as a service and is you as the devs have a bit more, I think, control to really control what they prioritize, right? You bring a very specific use case to Amazon, they may not care. They may say it's a roadmap item, and that might be it. But right when it's run by your organization, you come to that platform engineering team, and they understand at the end of the day that this use case you brought to them at the end of the day is tied to something revenue generating or critical, at this organization. So they have, I guess, really just more of a care to implement this feature and understand like we need to prioritize this item because there's a reason we're asking for it. It's coming from us, from the devs and customer who are using that actual application that underlying database uses. So I think that's what's nice. I think that's kind of a big reason to do it is you have more flexibility when you create it yourself and can kind of control how it matures, how it changes. But yes, I think the biggest one is typically cost driven, but it is nice too, as you can really control certain things. You might have compliancy reasons as well. We need to be multi-cloud, so we need to be completely on-prem, and sure, some of these as a service offerings that are public have good FedRAMP offerings and things, but when you create your own, it's much easier to adhere to these more complex kind of compliancy, reasons. It's much easier, the as a service models in the cloud like RDS, Aurora, Google Cloud SQL, Azure Flexible Server, it might not have everything you need there. So I think those are kind of about the three-ish reasons. But again, to say it one more time, it's typically sometimes comes down to cost, but there's a maturity thing in your organization if you're at a point where it makes sense to invest the resources to have a platform engineering team who creates this.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to say, well, I think it would be great for organizations of any size to be able to have a platform engineer or platform engineering, right? Especially, we call this empowering platform engineers. But I think empowering platform engineers is preceded by understanding that platform engineering can power you, right? And that not everybody has the luxury from a resource standpoint to start with a platform engineer. I think the function starts to really be affordable and generate returns for everybody when it's larger. Anyway, that was the side. I did want to say, ironically, I'm sorry, Will, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just agreeing. Sorry, saying yes.
Oh, that's all. Yeah, I want to make sure I stop for you to agree with me because Jim doesn't agree with me that much, so I like hearing it. No, I was wondering. We were just talking before we got on about ChatGPT went down last night, and then we talked about AWS outages. And I'm wondering, in addition to cost, sort of customizability, and the other prompters you mentioned for building out internal databases as a service, is avoiding dependency on an external sort of single point of failure one that you're coming across as well?
I think so. Yeah, there's a lot of those reasons to really be good and maybe follow more, maybe kind of cloud native practices. Cloud native, you can think of the benefits too, the flexibility. I can deploy this where I am. So when you are kind of subject to, one cloud provider's database as a service, when it goes down, you're down, right? And sure, some of them are really friendly and will let you, do replication outside of them to an external source. But yeah, I think that's what's nice to a private one. You choose where that exists, and you can follow those really good cloud native practices too, where you're not really stuck to a one vendor's as a service model. So I think that's also a big benefit as well.
Yeah, thanks.
I actually, I'm glad you ended on that because I wanted to double click on the cloud native databases versus a traditional monolithic style of database. Because I think when we were in Toronto, you asked the room how many people have used databases and cloud native databases or deploying cloud native databases. And I don't think anyone in the room raised their hand, or maybe somebody kind of half did. So it doesn't seem like it's anything that's really widespread yet. So can you talk a little bit about that? Why would someone want to deploy a cloud native database as opposed to a traditional database?
Yeah, and I actually have lots of thoughts on this. And if you have been to one of our events, I've talked about this because I have lots of thoughts about this and actually enjoy this topic quite a bit. I'll keep it short so we're not here giving an entire lecture on this. But, is it cloud native if you just, in your Ansible, your Terraform, you point to, I keep kind of calling them out, but, kind of RDS. And in a sense, yes, you are leveraging the cloud and the flexibility that service offers. But is it really kind of cloud native? I think yes and no. Like I kind of explained, it is. It is a cloud service, but it's not necessarily cloud native. When you can be cloud native, do this yourself, deploy kind of, say wherever you want. And kind of on the topic of traditional kind of monolithic databases, maybe less so kind of how it's deployed. I think cloud native is great, right, for leveraging the flexibility of the cloud containerization for small, specific, best, bespoke microservice databases that support very specific functions in an application. This is just for users. This is just something for our API. This just handles, so and so. So I think there's kind of two parts to that answer, but when it comes to traditional kind of monolithic databases versus cloud native, it follows all of the same best practices of cloud native on the database side, where now you have specific databases for very specific functions or applications. It's kind of a simplified answer, but I am kind of passionate about that because I think a lot of people do say they're cloud native when they just point to a private or public as a service.
And in your view, is the primary differentiator in being a cloud native DB as opposed to traditional or monolith is on the keyword traditional or monolith? In other words, to properly support a cloud native application, which is often going to be distributed, often going to have a high transaction rate. It feels like I hear you saying that one of the number one differentiators is that you've implemented a cloud-based distributed database, or even if it's on-prem. Yeah, can you confirm or disconfirm that monolith is an operative word in differentiating between why go cloud native versus traditional?
Mm-hmm. I might have a hard time kind of answering that, but maybe this might be a good point to kind of say.
I have a hard time asking it, so don't worry. Don't feel bad.
I understand kind of what you're getting at too. I think it's good to probably add maybe just a bit about kind of what Percona does to help more cloud native to avoid large kind of monolithic database deployments. Right, Percona likes best practices. It actually meant performance consulting, but I think kind of what Percona has to somewhat help that to have very small, highly available deployments is Percona has a lot that we're doing on the Kubernetes side. We produce operators for the Kubernetes operators for all the technologies we support. For MongoDB, we have one for Postgres. We have actually two for MySQL, and we even have kind of a GUI for maintaining those. So, to bring it back to platform kind of engineering, the end users of what the platform engineers create have a GUI for just like you would have in a public database as a service. The GUI, by the way, is called Everest, but you need to scale up compute resources. You need to add a read replica, things like that. You need to just hit a button and it'll go around your highly available cluster and do a minor version upgrades. Percona has a lot of stuff to kind of enable that, so you're confident and it's simple to deploy more microservice based databases that support specific functions versus a large monolithic database that we throw everything at, and there's some scary tables in there you don't want to talk about.
Awesome. Yeah, and you answered it well. You probably answered it better than I asked it, so thanks.
Right on. Right on.
We're getting close to our end time, and I want to move to Q&A. We have some questions that have come in, so I want to make sure that we respond to those as well. But the last thing I want to ask you is just about the future of platform engineering. Where do you think this role is going, and how do you think people can best enable platform engineering in their own organizations and really engage with and benefit from this?
Mm-hmm. I'll keep a really quick one for us too. I think I would say very positively why it's going to continue and be more of a role, or more roles, more job opportunities for it, is primarily in the role I'm in, we hear a lot of, and this is something I'm sure we can all attest to, we need to do more with less, right? So because of a lot of those cost reasons, I think we're going to see more and more of these at organizations, especially as they come out of say a startup mode. I think that the best way to enable it, I probably don't necessarily have the best insight really into that. I do talk to kind of some of platform engineers and hear some of their woes, so to speak, but I might have kind of touched on it earlier, but I think some of the best thing, at least one thing to consider I can leave you with, is it's a two-way street with your end user, to break down those silos, so to speak, maybe not necessarily a silo, but the developers that are using your platform, make sure they're heard and make sure you're conveying to them what they need to do. I think, to keep it very simple, that's kind of the thoughts I would have on that.
Great. Brian, any closing thoughts on either that response or the entire webinar here?
Well, yeah, I'll tell you what I hear, injecting my own. And again, Will, I'll hopefully get a chance for you to go, yeah, you're right, versus correcting me. But, what I am hearing is what Percona offers in the deployment of databases as a service, with or without Percona, is a great example of what this recently embraced function of platform ops and platform engineering provides. And that's being able to provide a reliable, affordable, trusted, and customized service for your internal operations infrastructure and app dev teams. And I'm also hearing and believe from my own experience that in an ideal world, everybody could have a centralized function, just like a sports team. They have trainers. They have people that deal with the equipment. There is infrastructure that allows the San Francisco 49ers to go out and compete. I think there's infrastructure that allows the other functions in an organization to go out and compete. And so, you were one of those people supporting and empowering platform engineers by delivering them a service that allows them to support their customers cost effectively. Did I summarize that correctly? Well,
just about. I'd replace one word with service with software, or maybe some service, but really, I think empowering those roles with, hey, we have this software and it works and it's free. I think that was kind of all I'd add to that. I'd give you the thumbs up on that, though.
All right, I got a good grade. See, Jim, some people give me good grades. I'd like to steal another moment, though, before we move on, to just not ask you another question in that line, sort of in final wrapping up. If there are people here that either don't have that have platform ops or platform engineering functions in their organization, what can they best do to empower and leverage platforms ops and platform engineers? If you have an opinion.
That's a hard one. I'll be honest, Jim, do you kind of have a thought on that one? I know I'm kind of on the hot seat here.
I'll take
No, that's why you're here, to answer the hard questions.
I think what you can do, and you just said it, you talked earlier about dependencies, right? Someone may need a particular driver. They may need a particular platform supported. They may need a particular function installed on the DB. And I sort of feel that, especially for the app dev teams that oftentimes are naturally forward leaning, I think the way that we can all enable, empower, and make the most use of our DevOps, platform engineering teams is to communicate with them, is to make sure you let them know where you're going, make sure you let them know what you need, because this is a team that's there prepared to support you, and they can support you better if they know what your needs are.
Yeah, I think so, to make sure you're aligned, and if you're the end user, you're confident in that alignment and your voice is heard. And same on the platform engineering, their voice is heard. I think they have a lot of prioritization, and there's reasons why their focus is in a certain area or new feature or offering or something. So yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
Awesome. Yeah. And I just had, in the spirit of DevOps, this is called platform engineering. I'd say it's probably not about treating your platform engineer as the person on the other side of the ticket or someone that provides you service, but rather a partner to ensure that you can deliver the best software.
Right. I would agree with that too. There's probably a good life lesson in there too about treating them right. But yeah, exactly. Especially because they're typically a portion of your organization, right? They want to see your success.
Awesome. Well, Jim, maybe you can do the boring stuff, logistics. No, I'm joking. Maybe you can take us up.
Yeah. Here's all the boring stuff. So we're going to actually move to Q&A. We have a bunch of questions here, so I want to be able to answer all of these. So if you're here with us live, stay on. I'm going to say goodbye to everyone who's watching on YouTube. Goodbye, YouTube. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to stick around for Q&A on these things, please come to the live sessions. And we'll do another one in a couple of weeks. And thank you, Will and Percona, for being here, providing the content and great discussion here today.
To the podcasting, grab your headphones, let's jam to the beats of a NADOG summer. NADOG summer. With Brian and Jim on the mic. Yes, drop knowledge, pure delight. DevOps chatter, turn the volume high. Brian and Jim bringing summer vibes.